They put me at the farthest table next to the kitchen door. Not even a name card, just +1. From the second I stepped into the hall, I knew I didn't belong. The Whitmore estate gleamed with curated opulence. Every candlestick perfectly aligned the florals, too white, too intentional. Margaret had outdone herself clearly. I could almost hear her rehearsed lines, understated elegance, Jessica. Not everything should scream for attention, except the silence here was deafening. Someone's heels clicked too loudly across the hardwood. Another guest coughed, and then the chatter resumed like a well-oiled machine. Waiters weaved through the crowd with champagne, none offering me a glass. I made my way past a series of round tables dressed in gold linens and overflowing arrangements, eucalyptus peonies, ivory roses. Everyone was someone here. I passed them all until I reached mine. Smallest table, no centerpiece, right by the kitchen's swinging door. There was no name card. Just one that read, +1. Margaret once told me true status doesn't need an invitation. It speaks for itself. I should have known what that meant. This was no oversight. It was deliberate. I sat. The chair wobbled slightly. From here, I had a clear view of the silver chafing trays being refilled. Every time the kitchen door swung open, it whooshed cold air. The smell of garlic and seared beef clung to the edges of my hair. "Mind if we join you?" A voice pulled me back. A man in a slightly outdated gray suit nodded toward the empty chairs. His partner, elegant but tired, offered a kind smile. "Please," I said. "I'm Harold," he said. "This is Beatrice." "Jessica," I replied. We settled into an awkward trio. The surrounding tables were already clinking glasses, immersed in laughter and long anecdotes about Amy and James. A few heads turned toward our table but quickly dismissed it. I could almost feel the collective blind spot resting on us. "Bit chilly back here, huh?" Harold remarked, tugging at his lapels. "Glamorous," I said dryly. Beatrice laughed under her breath. "We call this the overflow table." "I call it the exile table," I muttered. "Don't be so sure," Harold said, leaning in. "Sometimes the best stories start from exile." His words stuck with me. Footsteps approached Amy, dressed in a figure-hugging ivory dress with a neckline just shy of scandalous. Her smile was wide enough for the photographers, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Jessica," she purred. "You look understated." "I love that for you." I blinked. "Thanks." She didn't sit, didn't ask how I'd been, just turned toward Harold. "Uncle Harold, you clean up well." "I'm not your uncle, dear." Amy chuckled as if that made it even better, then turned to Beatrice. "And Beatrice? That brooch is something. A little vintage, isn't it?" Beatrice smiled, unfazed. "Survived 3 wars and 2 husbands." Amy's laughter was syrupy. "Well, I hope it holds up through dessert." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, Jessica, so glad you could make it. I didn't realize you were coming alone." "So brave." Margaret's voice rang from across the room. "Amy, darling, photos." Without waiting for a reply, Amy glided away, her perfume lingering like accusation. Harold leaned in again. "You're Jessica H." "Right." I looked at him, surprised. "Yes, I thought so. Years ago, you gave a pitch at a startup showcase in Palo Alto. Your platform's something to do with AI-assisted logistics?" I blinked again. "That was almost 8 years ago." He nodded, smiling. "You made an impression?" I smiled back, genuinely. It had been so long since someone remembered something about me that didn't involve being Amy's sister. The rehearsal dinner progressed like a stage play I'd never auditioned for. Courses were served with robotic precision beet salad fillet, mignon molten chocolate cake. Not once did Margaret come to my table. Not once did Amy look my way again. When the printed program was handed out, ivory cardstock with gold foil script, I skimmed it, searching for my name. Bridesmaids, ushers, speakers. Even Amy's college roommate had a reading slot. I wasn't listed, not under family, not even as guest. It stung more than I expected. I tried to hide the tremble in my hand as I folded the program and slipped it into my clutch. Beatrice caught my glance and offered a tight-lipped smile. They never expect the ones they dismiss to keep receipts. The clinking of glass cut through the chatter. Amy stood flanked by James. She raised her flute, her smile luminous. To all the dreamers who never quite got there but show up anyway. If I didn't speak, I might as well have been a ghost. That's how it felt sitting across from my own family. Even now, hours after the rehearsal dinner ended, the words clung to me. I sat alone in the guesthouse bedroom, wrapped in silence, thick as velvet. The Whitmore estate was vast, and yet they managed to make me feel invisible in it. My fingers hovered over my phone, then dropped to my lap. I didn't want to scroll, didn't want to see what the world was saying tonight. Instead, I stared at the headline I'd ghostwritten 6 months ago for a tech founder now hailed as a genius. Revolutionizing human efficiency. The next step in predictive AI. My words, their face, my thoughts, their legacy. The irony scraped against my chest. Outside, a faint wind rattled the old windows. I leaned back against the pillows, letting the memory surface. It was the night I signed away co-founding rights to the AI prototype. My prototype. I developed the predictive algorithm while still in grad school, pattern recognition across fragmented logistics chains optimized in real time. Elegant, efficient, dangerous in the wrong hands. You know how this will look, Margaret had said, lips tight, eyes sharper than the diamonds on her wrist. We can't have the family name tangled in litigation. I built it. It's mine. Margaret crossed her arms. And your sister has the investors. The Whitmore name. Your job is to protect that. Amy hadn't even pretended to object. She just looked at me with that tilt of the head that always meant superiority. You'll get your credit eventually. I believed them. Or maybe I just wanted to. A sharp ping pulled me back to the present. My phone screen lit up. Lucas. They're presenting your model tomorrow under someone else's name. Just wanted you to know. I stared at the message. My thumb hovered over the reply bubble, then retracted. I deleted it. Another ping. William. I'm flying in. Don't say anything yet. I didn't reply to him either. I was too tired. Tired of fighting with ghosts. Tired of screaming into a vacuum while Amy walked away in gowns that cost more than my yearly salary, armed with praise she hadn't earned. As kids, she once said to me after winning a spelling bee, "You're smart, but I'll always be the one they choose." She was 6. I was 9. I thought it was just a joke. Another message buzzed in. I ignored it and stood walking over to the desk. My laptop sat there cold. I opened it anyway. Typed in the passcode. There it was. An email with the subject line investor deck, Whitmore AI Suite. My stomach tightened. I clicked it open. Slide 1, a clean interface, the new branding, the logo that Amy had registered just 3 months ago without my knowledge. Slide 2, system architecture. Slide 3, predictive flowchart diagrams. Slide 4, my original notes verbatim. Even the notational shorthand I'd invented. Unchanged. Lifted. Erased of my name. They didn't even bother altering the structure. It was mine. Every line, every logic flow, every predictive loop mine. And yet, I wasn't anywhere in it. I should have screamed. Should have thrown the laptop against the wall. Instead, I sat still, staring at the monitor like it was a portal to another life, one I'd been quietly edited out of. A soft scratch broke the silence. I turned. Something had been slid under the door. I walked over cautiously, bent down, and picked it up. A folded note. No envelope. Just a single line in sharp, deliberate handwriting. They think you're finished. Prove them wrong. My hands trembled, not with fear, but something else. A flicker of heat in my chest. a weight that shifted. I looked toward the window. The estate grounds were dark now, shadowed under skeletal trees. Somewhere across the main house they were toasting and laughing and forgetting I existed. But ghosts, when they want to be, are very hard to ignore. Amy stood with her glass raised high and burned me alive with a single sentence. The morning air was crisp, brittle, almost as if the Connecticut autumn had sharpened its edges overnight. The garden courtyard behind the Whitmore estate had been transformed for the rehearsal brunch. Long white tables dotted with fall arrangements, amber leaves curling at their edges like old secrets, golden napkins, polished silver, too much Prosecco and far too many polite smiles. I sat near the end of the central table, positioned just far enough to be forgotten, yet close enough to hear every word that mattered. The sun hit Amy like a spotlight as she stood up, champagne flute in hand, her ivory coat fluttering slightly in the breeze. Her hair was pinned in a sculpted knot, every detail of her appearance calibrated for effortless elegance. I just want to say, she began, eyes sweeping the guests with practiced warmth. How grateful I am for all of you, for the laughter, the loyalty, the love. People cooed. Someone sighed. Margaret dabbed at her eyes, more out of tradition than sentiment, I suspected. Amy continued, voice light, lilting but razor sharp beneath. Some of us have spent years building relationships, companies, reputations. Some of us. She paused, looked directly at me. Well, some get lost along the way. But it's okay, because they still show up, and we still clap. A ripple of laughter scattered through the crowd, uneven, confused. A few guests chuckled out of obligation. Most just blinked into their mimosas. I didn't move. Margaret clapped. Slowly, deliberately. She turned toward me and smiled like a cat that just watched the mouse die. James shifted in his seat, his eyes dropping to the tablecloth. I pushed my fork aside and stood. Jessica, someone called behind me. I didn't turn. The garden buzzed as I walked away, the ambient sounds blurring into one long, nauseating hum. The stone path beneath my heels felt slick. The gold leaves now looked brittle, mocking. I made it to the gravel driveway before I let myself breathe. Wait. The voice came from the side path. Lucas. He approached, dark blazer, slightly wrinkled hair, unkempt, as if he hadn't slept. You still have time to walk away from this humiliation, he said quietly. I stared at him. You think I don't know that? My voice was low, steady. You could leave now. No one would blame you. Hell, I'd drive you myself. And then, what I asked. He didn't answer. Just looked at me the way someone looks at a candle that's about to burn itself out. I turned to leave, but another voice intercepted me. Margaret. Her heels clicked with regal confidence on the gravel as she approached. What did I tell you? She said, all softness stripped from her tone, about knowing your place. I didn't respond. She stepped closer, too close. This is what happens when you mistake potential for pedigree. You could have had a quiet, comfortable role if you'd stayed obedient. I looked her in the eye. You mean invisible? She gave a little shrug. Visibility is earned. She walked off her coat, catching the wind behind her like a cape, like she thought she was the queen of something. I turned away from the house. Enough. A black car idled at the edge of the circular drive. Tinted windows, engine still humming. The back door opened. I didn't ask who sent it. I just walked toward it, heels crunching against the gravel, and slid inside. The leather interior was warm, smelled of cedar and something faintly citrus. William sat on the other side. No tie. Sleeves rolled up. Calm, but not casual. He looked at me and said, I know what they did to you. And I know how to fix it. You can only swallow so many polite insults before you start spitting them back. Back inside the estate, the air had thickened. Not from heat, but from performance. The entire house hummed with bridal orchestration, curling irons, hissing dresses being steamed, laughter punctuated with the brittle pitch of tension. The makeup room smelled like powdered roses and cover-ups. Too much blush, too little truth. I moved through the hallway like a shadow with credentials nodding, smiling. Unseen, but not unknowing. Lucas found me first. He didn't speak right away, just slipped a slim, unlabeled USB drive into my palm as we crossed in the catering hallway, plates of lobster canapes separating us like a moat. Metadata's intact. Timestamps, authorship, internal commits. Registered under JH. Just like the first submission, he murmured without breaking stride. I tucked the drive into the inner pocket of my blazer and turned down the service hallway where silence pooled in the corners. I needed 5 uninterrupted minutes and a door that locked. Instead, I found Beatrice. And a broken zipper. "Oh, thank God," she said, eyes wide and arms twisted backward. "Can you help? This thing's gone rogue." Her emerald gown gaped open at the side seam, threatening to undo itself entirely. "Turn," I said, kneeling with one hand on her waist while pulling the fabric taut with the other. The zipper's teeth were stubborn, fitting metaphor. "Rough morning?" she asked, looking over her shoulder. "Only if you consider being toasted like a cautionary tale rough." She winced. "I thought that was unnecessarily pointed." It was surgical. The zipper finally slid closed. I smiled as I stepped back. "There. Your red carpet ready. Don't let them shrink you," Beatrice said, touching my arm. "You're the only one here whose eyes haven't dulled." I wanted to thank her. Instead, I nodded and moved toward the coat closet at the end of the hall, quiet, locked, private. I slipped inside and plugged the USB into my laptop. The screen blinked once. A folder opened, Prototype Alpha, JH 2017. Dozens of files, schematics, notes, time-stamped iterations. A complete skeleton of the architecture we had once sketched out on napkins and whiteboards, before Amy erased my name from the headline and substituted it with her own. I closed the screen. Not today, not yet. Outside the closet, I bumped into William. He gave no greeting, just leaned in, voice low. "Tomorrow you won't need a seat at their table. You'll own the room." I let the words sit. The shape of them warmed me in a way no champagne ever could. We parted without ceremony, and I drifted toward the prep lounge where bridal party chaos reigned. I turned off notifications on my phone and opened the voice memo app. I held it close, my breath steady. "Final move," I whispered. 10:45 a.m. Main stage. Tap. Saved. I stepped into the next room. Harold sat on a bench near the patio doors reading something on his tablet. He looked up when I passed. "Planning a speech?" he asked, head tilted. I smiled. "Something like that." He narrowed his eyes as if trying to read between lines I hadn't spoken. Then I heard the flutter of paper. A schedule pinned to the wall, flapping under the breeze of the heater vent. Press photo call, 10:40 a.m. Front stage. It was Margaret's handwriting in the margin, neat and surgical. She had timed it perfectly. She expected me to be long gone, out of frame, out of relevance. She would send her Amy, wipe the day clean of me. I stared at it. And then I smiled. "Perfect timing," I said aloud to no one in particular. ChatGPT John Noy. The worst sound at a wedding isn't crying, it's silence after the truth lands. The ballroom glowed like a jewelry box, amber chandeliers, flickering votives, polished floors gleaming under well-heeled shoes. The live quartet played something soft and baroque, polite music meant to keep conversation surface deep. No emotion, just elegance. And yet, the air pulsed with static. I sat near the head table, but not at it, flanked by Harold and Beatrice. Margaret had orchestrated the seating with mathematical cruelty, close enough for me to see the shine on Amy's diamond necklace, far enough that I wasn't part of the visual narrative. Amy sparkled in her evening gown, laughing in practiced intervals, glass in hand, like it was an extension of her wrist. James stood beside her, quieter, his smile calibrated but distracted. William wasn't seated. He stood near the back wall, sipping whiskey with the measured patience of someone watching a chessboard rearrange itself. Margaret was at the center of it all, of course. Her gaze circled the room like a hawk, protecting legacy, not joy. My fingers toyed with the stem of my water glass. I hadn't planned to speak tonight. I'd promised myself I wouldn't. But promises made in silence are easily rewritten in silence. When the music paused and dessert was being plated, I rose. A few heads turned. Amy's gaze snapped to mine, her smile freezing into something more porcelain than real. I raised my glass. I won't take long. Forks clinked against china, then stillness. Just breath and expectation. Some foundations look beautiful, I said, letting the pause swell until you check who laid the bricks. A soft gasp somewhere near the back. A few nervous chuckles trying to fill the void. Beatrice sat straighter. Harold leaned forward, eyes bright. Amy's smile twitched. She didn't blink. Margaret, ever the tactician, clapped once, a sharp, solitary sound that rang false. To legacy, I added, and the truths that outlast the architecture built to contain them. I sipped water, not champagne. Then I sat. No flourish, no smirk. Amy said nothing. The music resumed slightly off-tempo, but the room wasn't the same. Guests leaned in closer to one another, whispers curled under the tablecloths like vines looking for something to grip. Beatrice leaned toward Harold. "This just got interesting," she murmured, not caring who heard. I stood again, but this time to leave. The hallway outside the ballroom was cooler, quieter. Dim sconces lit the wood-paneled walls, their glow a relief from the ballroom's staged warmth. I didn't expect company. But James appeared as I rounded the corner toward the coat alcove. We nearly collided. "Jessica," he said. I waited. He looked down the hallway, then back at me. Uncertainty anchoring his otherwise placid expression. "You created it, didn't you? The original AI?" I tilted my head. "Do you really want to know? Or are you afraid to admit you already do?" He inhaled like he might speak again. But no words followed. Only a faint twitch in his jaw, a soft crease between his brows. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back toward the golden light of the ballroom. I stood there, my own reflection staring back at me from the glass pane beside the coat closet. Half a smile lingered on my lips, sharp, knowing unfinished code is memory. And this time it remembers whose hands wrote it. The guest house room smelled faintly of old wood and lavender detergent, the kind of scent meant to soothe, to erase the sharp edges of reality. But the cold blue light from my laptop carved a different truth. Hard lines, terminal screens, strings of logic that didn't lie. I sat cross-legged on the guest bed, my fingers hovering over the keys, like they remembered something my heart had tried to forget. The USB Lucas gave me sat snugly in the port, the directory tree unfolding on the screen, like a flower blooming in reverse. "You're seeing this right," Lucas's voice buzzed through the video call window. His background was a dimly lit office cluttered with monitors and energy drink cans. Top left pane metadata shows original author tag JH, date stamped 2016. "It's yours, Jess, undeniably." I stared at the timestamp, August 4th, 2016. A tiny flicker of that summer coating on the rooftop at Stanford, greasy takeout, sunburnt fingers tapping away, flashed across my mind. I blinked it back. This wasn't the time for nostalgia. "I buried this under 5 iterations of abstraction layers," I murmured. "I never thought they'd dig deep enough to strip it." "They didn't," Lucas said. "They copied it, slapped a prettier UI, and removed what made it human." I clicked deeper, tracing the core protocols. My protocols. Every function was like a familiar phrase in a language only I truly spoke. Then I found it. Helios Ethics v1.1 grayed out, commented out. "They disabled the failsafes," I said flatly. Lucas let out a low whistle. The moral boundaries, the restraint layers, they ripped the brakes off a Ferrari. They turned it into a weapon. My voice felt distant, like I was hearing it through glass. A second screen opened as Lucas shared his own logs. And here's the kicker. Their version logs don't include a licensing tree. That means they're presenting it as fully homegrown. No traceable origin. Until now, I said, and reached for the second USB drive. It was smaller, sleeker. I copied the full source log and encrypted it with a private key I hadn't used in years. One copy stayed with me. The other I slid into the side seam of my dress hanging over the armchair. It was emerald green, floor-length, backless, the kind of thing I once thought belonged to someone like Amy. Not anymore. My phone lit up. William. Still working? He asked when I picked up. Almost done. Good. But don't release it yet. Let them walk into their own narrative. They'll think the stage is theirs. That's when we pull the curtain. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I understand. There was a knock on the door. I muted the call, heart skipping once. Jessica, a voice called softly. It's Harold. I hesitated, then opened it. He stood there holding a bottle of soda and 2 plastic cups. Thought you might be up, he said. And well, I remembered something. I stepped aside, letting him in. He sat carefully at the small desk, glancing at the laptop screen but saying nothing. After a moment, he said, Your toast earlier, that line about foundations, made me think of something. Helios. My spine straightened. What about it? He looked at me, eyes clearer than they had been all evening. You pitched it at the Sun Valley Summit back in 17, didn't you? I was there. You were on the second stage, tucked between 2 panels on blockchain regulation. Nobody paid attention. But I did. I studied him. Why remember now? Because the code never forgets, he said simply. And neither do the people who saw who really built the future. I said nothing, just handed him one of the plastic cups. He clinked it gently against mine. Burn it all down. If anyone deserves to, it's you. He left shortly after. I locked the door behind him. Back at the laptop, I opened a blank voice memo and whispered into it. Plan remains. 10:45 a.m. main stage. File trigger pending. Then I shut the laptop, the screen blinking into blackness. My phone buzzed again. Lucas. I opened the message. Just one line. They're using it in tomorrow's presentation. Your face will be there without your name. You can't fake confidence forever. Eventually, even glass smiles shatter. The morning of the wedding broke cool and sharp, like porcelain waiting to crack. Autumn wind ruffled the silk ribbons tied to the estate's wrought iron balcony rails. Inside the dressing suite, heat lamps and camera lenses buzzed in quiet preparation for perfection. I sat near the edge of the room, a second-row presence, sipping bitter coffee from a gold-trimmed cup. Around me, stylists floated like ghosts with brushes and spray bottles. Amy was front and center, wrapped in a lace robe, hair, pinned lips tinted the soft pink of marketable joy. Her eyes met mine in the vanity mirror. Briefly, then flicked away like I'd been a shadow caught in her peripheral. Let's keep today clean, she said softly as a hairdresser misted her curls. I smiled, non-committal. Of course. Margaret stormed in, clipboard in hand, phone against her ear. No, no stage angle. B, not C. The drone footage will look slanted. Fix it. She disconnected, barely glancing at Amy before turning her attention to a young assistant. Are the investor passes coded correctly? We don't want them wandering into the wine cellar again. James, she snapped, did you finalize the pre-approval list? James looked up from his phone, distracted. Still reviewing. There was a last-minute name added, I think. Margaret narrowed her eyes. Who's? That's when I spoke. Quiet. Almost polite. Investors tend to dislike stolen property. Silence dropped like a stone into the room. Amy went rigid. Margaret froze. James looked at me, the words slow to register. Then his eyes darkened. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, voice hushed. I rose and stepped toward him, reaching into the silk lining of my coat. I handed him an envelope, thick sealed, labeled in block letters, "Confidential Origin Chain, Helios Protocol." "Maybe wait until after the vows," I said. "Or not. Your choice." He gripped it tightly but didn't open it. His lips parted, searching for a response that wouldn't ignite anything too visible. I walked past him and out onto the terrace. The air tasted of pine needles and distant rain. I leaned against the iron railing and looked out over the stretch of land I used to bike through as a kid, when none of this felt like theater, when I didn't yet know how inheritance worked. The sliding doors clicked behind me. Footsteps. James. "You think this is smart?" he asked, low and urgent. Doing this now, I turned to face him, letting the early sun catch the glass in my eyes. "I think smart was years ago. This is necessary. You'll burn everything. Then let it burn." Before he could reply, Margaret's voice bellowed from inside. "Where is the updated media brief? Where is the display file for the AI showcase?" A junior staffer stammered something unintelligible. Margaret's heels clacked against the tile as she paced. Her carefully composed mask faltered for a fraction of a second, shoulders tense, mouth pinched. Beatrice, watching from the lounge, swirled the last of her mimosa and said to no one in particular, "Your daughter's wedding is lovely. Shame the tech credits are smudged." Margaret whirled, but Beatrice only smiled and tapped her flute against her ring. I turned away from the balcony and headed down the hallway, heels silent on the carpeted floor. I passed Harold in the side parlor. He nodded once, like we were players exchanging cues between scenes. At the back of the guest house, I found a quiet corner and pulled out my phone. I opened the chat thread with Lucas. Typed 3 words, "Ready the file drop." 10:45 a.m. sharp. The closer you are to the fire, the more the truth scorches. The backstage holding room hummed with pre-ceremony anxiety, a symphony of low whispers and the soft shuffle of satin. It was meant to be private sanctuary for family and inner circle, but the air inside had long stopped being sacred. It crackled now, charged with unspoken fears and rehearsed perfection. Amy sat near the vanity gown, half-zipped, jaw tight, as a stylist adjusted a loose curl for the 3rd time. "It's fine," she snapped, yanking her head slightly. "Leave it." The stylist froze, then offered a whispered apology before retreating. Amy glanced at her reflection and then away, eyes flicking toward the door as if expecting an escape route to open from thin air. Margaret stepped in a beat later, clipboard nowhere in sight, a rare moment of vulnerability if one believed in such things. She crouched slightly, hands lightly gripping Amy's forearms. "You need to hold your posture," she said quietly. "This marriage holds more than just your future. Our name is riding on this. Eyes are everywhere today." Amy didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the bouquet sitting untouched on the side table. James stood off to the side, leaning against the paneled wall jacket slung over one shoulder. He looked more like a bystander than a groom, detached, silent, watching everyone and everything, like it was a play he hadn't agreed to be in. I waited until the tension swelled just enough, until Margaret's voice reached the edge of command, but hadn't yet tipped into demand. Then I stepped in. No one noticed me at first. I moved with purpose, but not with haste. That was the key. If you walked like you belonged, no one questioned why you were there. Amy saw me first. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but something close to dread. "Jessica," Margaret said sharply. "This is a private." "I know," I said, calm as water. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small flash drive, black, nondescript, labeled in neat white letters. I walked up to Amy, extended my hand, and placed the drive in her palm. "In case you ever want to know who really built your pedestal." Amy stared at it, lips parted. Her fingers closed around the object as if it might burn her. Margaret stepped forward. "What is that?" Her voice wasn't raised, but it throbbed with warning. I turned to her with a smile so neutral it might as well have been carved from stone. "Just a souvenir." Margaret's eyes flicked between us. Amy froze in me, unbothered, and something in her composure cracked. "Not a full break, just a fracture. Enough to let the heat through." "You don't get to do this today," she hissed. "I didn't do anything," I said, stepping back. "I just handed over the truth." Margaret's hand moved so fast I almost missed it. She slapped the drive from Amy's hand. It hit the floor with a sharp plastic thwack and skidded beneath the mirrored dresser. No one moved. Even the stylists paused. Amy stood eyes wide, staring at the space where the flash drive had disappeared. James moved first. He crouched without a word, reached under the dresser, and pulled it free. The room waited. He turned it over in his palm. His brow furrowed as he read the label aloud just once. JH, Original Core. Oct 2016. Even empires built on lies can look beautiful until someone dares to ask who paid the price. The dinner tent was a glowing cathedral of deception. Soft white linens, rows of crystal glasses, chandeliers strung like constellations. Candlelight danced off the polished cutlery, casting golden halos over the seated guests. From a distance it was a vision of grace, but from the inside I could feel it, the weight of stagecraft, the carefully rehearsed roles, the unspoken script etched into every sideways glance. Margaret sat near the head of the long table, regal in navy silk, a sapphire brooch blinking at her collar like a warning light. Her voice floated just loud enough to be overheard, casual, but cut with precision. "Oh, Jessica." Yes, she was always the dreamer. Brilliant in theory, tragic in follow-through. A guest leaned in, chuckling behind a napkin. "Didn't she get fired from her own startup?" Margaret gave a modest laugh. "Oh, not fired, just redirected. Some minds don't fit into leadership, you understand." The ripple spread. Soft murmurs tilted heads. One journalist's eyes gleamed. I caught the word NDA under her breath. My phone buzzed in my lap. A message from Lucas. "Margaret leaked the settlement. Full file. They're spinning you as unstable." The air collapsed in my lungs. Around me, the clink of glasses and the hum of string music formed a mocking lullaby. Every whisper sounded like a siren now. I turned away from the table, pushing back my chair. I didn't excuse myself. I couldn't. My legs moved without instruction, carrying me past velvet-draped walls and out into the shadows of the estate's west corridor. The powder room was cool, scented with lavender. I locked the door behind me and leaned against the sink. The mirror stared back, blank and too bright. My reflection looked collected, composed, but inside something crumbled. The edges of my spine bent inward. The muscles in my jaw clenched to keep from shattering. A part of me whispered, "Maybe this is how it ends." Quiet. Smothered in gossip. I didn't cry. I couldn't. But I pressed my palms against the marble and lowered my head, the silence pressing in thick as fog. From behind the door, I heard Harold's voice, distant but firm. "Let her talk. She's loud because she's scared." The simple truth of it sliced through the noise in my head. I raised my eyes again to the mirror. The reflection looked unchanged, but something inside it was different. Hardened. "They want me to disappear," I whispered. "But I'm not leaving my name behind." A soft rustle interrupted the silence. A folded note slid under the door. I stared at it, heart thudding in suspicion and wonder. I bent down, picked it up, and unfolded the square of parchment. 7 words handwritten in William's familiar script. "You're not alone. We strike at 10:45. When he bowed, everything in the room changed, and I remembered who I was. The wedding ceremony had all the trappings of a coronation. golden canopy above a gleaming marble platform aisle flanked by hydrangeas and white orchids, soft chamber music playing just low enough to be forgettable. The rows of guests sat in their polished rows like well-dressed chess pieces fanning themselves lightly in the mid-morning sun. It was 10:44 a.m. Margaret stood off to the side coordinating with a tech assistant wearing all black. She whispered something sharp, motioned toward the tall screen behind the altar, a sleek monolith waiting for its moment. Her face was calm, pristine, but the cords in her neck were tight. Amy stood beneath the canopy veil in place, but not yet lowered. Her expression was distant lips pressed into a tight line that passed for serenity to anyone who didn't know her well. I knew her too well. William was seated 2 rows from the front, looking straight ahead. Lucas, though technically not invited, had managed to slip in through a side aisle and was perched near the AV crew watching everything like a hawk. I stood just behind the last row, a shade outside the spotlight, my hands still breath-even. In my dress, lining the second USB rested warm against my side. But I wouldn't need it. The screen behind the altar flickered. Margaret stepped forward, voice amplified. Before the vows, the Whitmore family is honored to present a brief showcase of our next innovation, one we hope will reflect the same values as this Union Vision legacy and trust. She gave a small nod. The technician tapped something on his tablet. The screen froze, glitched, then began to play. Only it wasn't Margaret's file, it was mine. A younger version of me filled the screen. Hair in a tight bun, no makeup, speaking with quiet certainty in a room that barely held 10 people. A timestamp in the corner, October 2016. The future of ethical AI doesn't begin with capability, I was saying. It begins with conscience. We don't just teach machines to learn, we teach them when to stop. My voice was steady, clear. A model diagram lit up beside me, annotated with my initials JH. The room held its breath. Margaret's eyes went wide. For a moment, she didn't move. Then I stepped forward. The aisle seemed longer than I remembered. Each step echoed in the silence. A few heads turned, whispering. The video ended before I reached the front. I stopped near the altar, not touching it. Amy stared at me. James turned. And then he did something no one could have predicted. He stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately, and he bowed. Deep, precise, and without hesitation. CEO, he said. The word rang louder than the music ever had. Gasps filled the air. Half the audience reached for their phones. Some began clapping. Others simply looked stunned. A reporter near the aisle whispered, "That's her. That's Jessica Hart." Margaret dropped the mic. It hit the marble with a sharp metallic clang and rolled sideways. No one retrieved it. For a long moment we just stood there. And then I turned, stepped closer to Amy. Her face didn't show rage or denial, just something older, sadder. I leaned in, my voice meant only for her. "Let's finish your wedding. You deserve that much. But this empire, it's done." Empires rarely fall in silence. But this one cracked like porcelain in a ballroom. The wedding reception moved outdoors after the ceremony, the manicured lawn shimmering under the autumn sun. White tents fluttered in the breeze, champagne flowed freely, and jazz from a live quartet spilled over the tables like warm honey. But none of it dulled the tension coiling just beneath the surface. Margaret stood stiffly near the head table, her smile a full costume now. The mic she'd dropped minutes ago had been retrieved, but not by her. Reporters buzzed at the edge of the lawn like hornets circling a wounded queen, whispering, recording, threading headlines into their phones. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to speak at all. William was the first to act. He rose from his seat with practiced elegance and turned to the gathered guests, his voice sharp enough to slice through murmurs. "To those of you asking questions, we, the strategic investors behind Whitmore AI, hereby withdraw our support." Effective immediately. A ripple of gasps, a sudden hush. Margaret flinched. This is, this is all a misunderstanding, she called out, trying to override him. Jessica Hart was part of an early prototype. Yes, but, you're right, I said, cutting her off gently. I was part of it. All of it. I handed a folder to the journalist from TechFrame who had drifted toward the front like blood toward the scent of fresh injury. He opened it, eyes widening. The old patent record, the 2016 diagram, my name at the top. Harold let out a low whistle from the second table. Beatrice leaned in, whispering, "The smartest revenge is the quiet kind. No screaming. Just facts." James stepped away from Amy, his expression no longer guarded. "I won't be continuing as an executive in the AI division," he said, "or anywhere under the Whitmore business umbrella." Margaret spun toward him. "You're my son. And that's the only reason I haven't said more," he replied. She looked to the crowd, grasping for someone to defend her. But the press had begun to close in now, their questions more urgent. "Ms. Whitmore, did your firm knowingly present plagiarized IP? Do you deny the validity of the metadata? Will you be issuing a public apology to Jessica Hart?" Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. She took a single step back from the spotlight and didn't return. Someone had cut the music. Or maybe I'd just stopped hearing it. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. My presence had become its own kind of testimony. The fact spoke. The silence afterward underlined every sentence in bold. William approached from behind, not to gloat, but to anchor. "They'll come for you harder now," he murmured. "That was only the beginning." "I know," I said. And I meant it. The fall of a house built on lies doesn't end with one truth. It crumbles by the weight of its own denial. Then, out of the swell of broken silence, Amy appeared. Her heels crunched softly on the gravel. The train of her gown whispered across the stones. She didn't look at Margaret. She didn't glance at James. She came straight toward me. She stopped a foot away, eyes searching my face. Behind her, guests were rising, unsure whether to stay seated to clap or to leave. Some filmed. Most just watched, breath held like a final note waiting for release. Amy's voice was barely audible. "Are you going to destroy the rest of my wedding too?" Her words hung between us, part plea, part accusation. And that was the moment. Not the applause, not the cameras, that quiet, shaking question, spoken by a woman who had believed until today that the spotlight was always hers by right. Not fabrication. The porcelain had cracked. Now it was starting to fall. There's one question sisters never want to ask. Was I part of the lie? The air was colder than it should have been for late October. Autumn winds rustled the hedges lining the back garden, sending dry leaves spinning in little spirals across the flagstone path. The festivities had moved indoors, but I stayed behind. So did Amy. She stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself in her satin-sheath dress, no longer radiant under the fading sun. Her hair, still perfect from the morning ceremony, seemed like an ironic crown too composed for a woman unraveling inside. "I have to know," she said. Her voice cracked. Was it all true? I didn't answer right away. Amy turned to face me fully, her hands falling limply to her sides. "James, the investors, even Mom. Did everyone climb because you let yourself sink?" I met her eyes. "No one steps on you unless you're already lying down." A gust of wind whipped between us, carrying the faint scent of peonies and champagne, both of which now made my stomach churn. Behind her, the estate windows glowed softly. Somewhere inside, someone was laughing. But out here, the silence felt like truth. I wasn't trying to destroy anything, I said. Not the wedding. Not you. Just the myth. Amy's lips trembled. "I never thought I was enough, Jess. Never. Mom always said Jessica's the mind, Amy's the face. You stepped back so I could be seen, but I always knew I didn't earn it." "You were 16, I replied more gently than I expected. "I made a choice. and you became the symbol they wanted. Her shoulders sagged. You made me feel like I mattered, but deep down I knew. I was only the one they picked because you disappeared. I looked away. Above us, the sky was dimming, streaked with ash-purple clouds. On the second-floor balcony, a silhouette watched. Margaret, arms folded, unmoved. Amy followed my gaze, then shivered. Do you think she ever loved us? I didn't respond. There were questions too dangerous to speak aloud even now. Even after everything. I didn't know what they did to you. Amy said, voice fragile. If I had, maybe I would have done something. Maybe I said. She took a hesitant step forward. Do you hate me? No. Then why does it feel like I lost you a long time ago? Because you did. My voice caught just slightly. And I lost you too. Her lip quivered. Can we fix it? We can start by not pretending anymore. Amy exhaled shakily. Then unexpectedly she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't for show. It was raw and trembling and real. I didn't hug her back, not right away. I stood still, arms at my sides, letting her grief run its course against my shoulder. Then finally, I whispered, I don't need you to apologize. I need you to learn how to stand on your own for the first time. She clung tighter for a moment, then released me. Her mascara had smudged a dark stain under her right eye. She wiped it away without shame. Behind her, the balcony silhouette vanished. Margaret was gone. Neither of us said anything more. The wind rustled again, and Amy turned toward the house. Her steps were slower now, heavier with thought. As she stepped through the rear doors into the estate, I saw James waiting in the hallway. He didn't reach for her hand. Margaret disappeared that night. No farewell, no fire, just absence. The Whitmore estate, once buzzing with the chatter of guests and the rustle of silk gowns, had settled into a haunting silence. I woke to a pale gray morning that pressed against the windows like the weight of something unspoken. The halls echoed with my own footsteps as I walked from room to room, each one more hollow than the last. Her bedroom door was ajar, the closet open hangers bare, the vanity spotless, no stray brushes or perfume bottles left behind. Only a single envelope on the desk addressed in her unmistakable cursive, legal affairs only. I didn't open it. Not yet. Lucas's voice broke through the silence buzzing from my phone. She's gone. Sold everything, her entire stake in the company. Sold to who I asked, already guessing the answer. Anonymous offshore holding. Cayman structure. My guess. She's distancing herself from liability, but keeping a hand on the strings. Typical. Even in retreat, Margaret played the long game. I wandered into the library, the one room that still felt like it held breath. Shelves full of curated classics, artful lies, and staged intellect. It was the only room she never let anyone rearrange. Amy sat curled in the window seat blanket wrapped around her like a shield. Her eyes were red but dry now. She blocked me, she said quietly. Email, phone. Even Harold couldn't reach her assistant. She never blocked you before I asked. Amy shook her head. Never. We sat in silence. The kind of silence that didn't demand to be filled. The kind that settled deep into your bones and stayed there. Beatrice entered without knocking. She held 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to me. She won't answer, dear, she said, looking at Amy. People like Margaret don't offer explanations. They vanish, reposition, and reappear when the world's forgotten to watch. Amy looked like she wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to say. I walked to the office, the one room I had refused to enter since arriving. The air inside was colder. A screen still flickered faintly from sleep mode. On the desk, a manila envelope waited with my name printed on the tab. A lawyer sat inside near the window. Mid-40s, tidy, forgettable. I represent Whitmore Holdings now in interim transition. I was instructed to deliver this to you personally. He slid the folder across the polished surface. Inside a notarized copy of the 2016 Intellectual Property Registration, and another unredacted. Margaret's original record. My name, Jessica Helen Whitmore, typed beside primary creator and signatory. No footnotes, no asterisks. Where was this kept? I asked, trying to suppress the rising tremble in my hands. Ms. Whitmore retained the only physical copy in her private archive. The board had no knowledge. I stared at it for a long moment, then noticed something else, a single line handwritten in black ink beneath the official seals. I was wrong to think you weren't ruthless enough to reclaim what's yours. I couldn't tell if it was apology or warning. Beatrice peeked over my shoulder, then stepped back. She knew, she said, even back then, knew what that one day you'd come for it, and when you did, she wouldn't stop you. She'd simply step aside. Amy appeared at the doorway. She had changed into jeans and a plain sweater, her bridal curls pulled into a rough bun. She looked smaller without the gown, more human. She left me nothing, Amy said. Not even a letter. She left us all something, I murmured. Just not what we expected. The lawyer cleared his throat, gathered his things, and left without a word. I remained seated long after the others had drifted out. The file sat heavy in my lap, the ink still fresh enough to sting. I thought about everything Margaret had done, the manipulation, the silencing, the branding of ambition as arrogance. But now she had disappeared, no press release, no performance, no curtain call. Only a final move in a game she knew she couldn't win. In the folder, a single handwritten line read, I was wrong to think you weren't ruthless enough to reclaim what's yours. Winning feels lighter than I thought. It's what comes after that weighs you down. A week had passed since the wedding, and the world strangely hadn't stopped. Not even a tremble. No headlines screamed, no confetti fell. But I felt different, as if someone had peeled a second skin off me and left the air colder against the rawness beneath. The cafe sat quietly at the edge of a lake in Boston, the kind of place that didn't advertise itself. No logo, no slogan. Just glass warmth and the hush of locals who didn't need to speak much. I wrapped my fingers around the ceramic cup, letting the heat bleed into my skin. Autumn clung to the window panes, gold pressed against fog. William arrived with no announcement. No grand entrance. Just a man in a navy coat, eyes sharp, calm like he always was, when everything else spun off its axis. They're asking for you in London, he said after the usual silence between us. Keynote on AI ethics. Headliner slot. Thought leadership series. I didn't answer right away. I watched a duck ripple across the lake. Its reflection split, reformed. It's not a trap, William added gently. You can shape the narrative now, Jess. No more hiding. They'll listen. I didn't tell him the real reason I hesitated. That after all the noise, I wasn't sure I wanted to be the voice anymore. Instead, I nodded almost imperceptibly. Send me the deck template. I'll think about it. Later that afternoon, I opened my laptop. Lucas's message blinked at the top of my inbox, subject finalized legal transfer. IP registry status active owner Jessica Helen Whitmore. It was clean, legal, untouchable. I had my name back, not in whispers, not on napkins or anonymous tip-offs, but in digital ink recognized by the world. A strange emptiness followed. Like I'd built a bonfire, lit it, and now had to stand still and feel the heat. The doorbell above the cafe chimed. The barista handed me a slim parcel, brown paper, no return address. Inside was a folded letter and a sketch, Harold's signature scribbled at the bottom. The drawing caught me off guard. It was of me mid-sentence, apparently hand-raised eyes determined on a stage marked TEDx. The caption read, "That day I knew you'd terrify someone powerful." I held it for a long time, smiling despite myself. Harold, with his thick glasses and sly comments, had seen me long before I'd remembered how to see myself. As I slipped the letter back into the envelope, another smaller one tumbled out. A hand-drawn picture, childlike and crooked but unmistakably familiar. Two girls on a podium, arms linked, a huge red circle behind them. Amy's handwriting underneath read, "This was my dream, too. I just never knew how to share the stage." I exhaled. Not sharp, not broken, just steady. A thread tugged behind my eyes and I blinked too fast to stop the tears. I hadn't cried through the public shaming, the gaslighting, the erasure. I hadn't cried when my mother disappeared or when Margaret left only a note that said I'd learned to be ruthless. But here, alone with a crayon drawing, I finally let it go. William was still seated across from me, sipping black coffee, his eyes now soft. "You know," I said, voice hoarse, "maybe it's time I spoke. Not through a leak, not through someone else. My words, my way." He raised a brow. "So we accept London?" I paused, then smiled. "No," I said. "We start in Boston. Small stage, honest room, no spotlight tricks." He tapped his mug against mine. "Even better." Outside, the lake glistened beneath the low sun, its surface scattered with light. I wasn't who I had been a week ago. Not the ghost at the kitchen table, not the name in the footnote. I wasn't vengeance either, not anymore. I was someone rebuilding, not for revenge, but for remembrance. Someone who finally knew winning wasn't the point. Becoming whole again was. The conference room read, "Jessica Whitmore, CEO, keynote address." The letters were bold silver on navy, etched across the glass wall of the ballroom entrance. People passed beneath them, murmuring, glancing at their badges, some already nudging colleagues and pointing toward the stage. It wasn't just a tech panel, it was the event. The kind people blogged about before and after. Cameras were already positioned, lights preset. My name for once wasn't on the second slide, or an afterthought in the footnotes. I exhaled, adjusting the mic clipped to the collar of my navy blouse. Clean lines, no frills. Not to impress, just to arrive fully as myself. William stood backstage with a clipboard and an untouched espresso. 10 minutes, he said quietly. Lucas confirmed the stream's live. Rooms full. Standing capacity. "I'm not here to perform," I said. "You're here to be seen," he corrected. Which, for what it's worth, is rarer. My heels clicked against the polished stage steps. The walk to the podium felt longer than it was, not because of nerves, but because each stride pressed into years of erasure, dismissal, compromise. And now, into presence. The spotlight hit as soon as I emerged. Cameras whirred, phones tilted. The crowd rustled as moderators introduced me, founder of the Helios Framework, the first ethical AI platform to embed fail-safe transparency at the core level. A leader in justice-first innovation and a reminder technology reflects the soul of its maker. Applause rising like a swell. But I didn't mistake it for victory. Applause was easy. Recognition was the real currency. And now I had both. I leaned into the mic. "I won't take your time with a long origin story," I began. "You can read those in headlines and case files. What I will say is, this justice is not about revenge. It's not even about winning." A few pens paused mid-scribble. "It's about being called by the right name." Silence. And then a rising clap. One pair of hands, then another. Soon the room filled with it, not thunderous but honest, not the clamor of pity, but the echo of understanding. I glanced across the rows. Faces of founders, engineers, critics, skeptics. People who once cited my work without citing my name. People who now had no choice but to acknowledge both. And in the far back behind a pair of press cameras, a figure shifted. White blonde hair pulled into a severe knot. Pearl earrings, poised even in retreat. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just let the moment stretch and then moved on. "This isn't a speech about what I've lost," I continued. "It's about what we must preserve. Integrity in creation, transparency in power, accountability in ambition. No slides, No gimmicks. Just my voice in my name standing on ground I had earned. And sometimes I said as I closed, all it takes to change everything is one rightful place bearing your name. Cameras clicked. The room stood. I stepped down from the stage. William nodded to someone I couldn't see. Security media liaison. It didn't matter. I wasn't hiding anymore. Outside the main floor, near the side corridor where the press mingled, Beatrice stood elegant in her quiet way, with a messenger bag slung over one shoulder and a crooked grin on her face. "Well," she said, handing me a bottle of water. "I'd call that a beginning." I raised an eyebrow. I thought it was the end. Beatrice tilted her head toward the crowd, still pouring out of the room. "You really think a woman who just dropped the cleanest mic in AI history gets to ride off quietly?" I laughed, more from exhaustion than humor. "Maybe just a small, quiet ending." She handed me a folder. "Ted wants you again. But this time on your terms. No intro, no summary, just a chair, a spotlight, and your voice." I looked down at the folder, then back at the hallway, the stage, the name on the door still shimmering through the glass. Jessica Whitmore, not +1, not JH, just me. Jessica steps down. Beatrice is waiting. Ready to write Part 2. She entered as an afterthought and exited as a name they could no longer ignore. In the end, it wasn't revenge that echoed, it was clarity, purpose, and the sound of a stolen legacy returning home. When injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story moved you, like, share, and leave a comment below. Type 1 if you felt the impact. Type 2 if you think justice still has further to go.